So today I'm just gonna do a raw sit down video with no script, nothing, and just talk about how getting laid off was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So most of you who are watching my videos lately know that I have not been working a full-time animation job in the past year and a half now, and that's kind of where my career really started, was working in the Los Angeles animation industry, working for studios such as Netflix, Glen Keane Productions, Tonko House, Skydance Animation, and those were all wonderful experiences that honestly I don't, ever regret any of my past. But at the same time, a lot of things have shifted in our industry, which, limits a lot of the job opportunities out there. And for me, I personally feel like this is still just a season or a wave that is just lasting a little bit longer than usual, but I don't think anything ever stays the same in life. I'm a believer that change is the only constant we have. So I do think things will recover eventually. I just think what that might look like will look different than how we've known these art and creative industries before. So the story about how I got laid off is nothing dramatic or crazy. In the animation industry, it's very normal for people to get laid off at the end of projects, especially if you go into one just knowing that by the time this project ends, so does your time on that project. If you're lucky, you might be recirculated onto a different project at that studio, but that's not always promised or guaranteed for everyone. So for me personally, I've always been working on my own individual projects outside of just animation jobs. I've always been working on my own comics ever since I graduated school and dealt with that period of unemployment for months before landing my first animation job. I was always instilled with the fear that, you could always be replaced. Nobody cares about you really other than yourself. Even if I did land a job, cool, but what if I get fired or laid off unexpectedly in the job? I feel like at the end of the day, I did not like the idea of a career really controlling me as a person or how I felt about my life. And it's something I've been working on for the past 5 years or so, since that's really when I started even being a part of the workforce. And I think that being laid off last year was probably the most liberating thing that has happened to me, because it really did open me up to how I would operate as a creative professional without a pre-established industry kind of influencing my views or thoughts on the world or myself. So just to get straight to the point, getting laid off is not fun. It's not like people just want to get laid off. It usually happens and you kind of do your best to stay out of that position. And I think that usually happens for the first 6 months to a year of being in that position, where you'll say okay, maybe I'll get a job in 6 months from now. Maybe I'll get a job in 1 year from now. And then maybe that day doesn't really ever happen, or maybe there are stepping stones that make it seem like it might happen, but then it doesn't. But ultimately, I find that your financial stability is going to be the first point of concern when you get laid off, and you're probably going to be doing the best thing you could do to find another job to recover that part of yourself. But for me, I think this obviously is going to differ from person to person. I've always just been working on my own side projects alongside my animation job, and I tried my best to do what I can to monetize those side projects as either passive income or side hustle money. And I'm sure a lot of artists out there do the same. I know of many friends who either teach on the side, or they do commissions on the side, or freelance on the side. So it's not uncommon for artists to still do some sort of side hustle alongside their full-time job. It's just a matter of maintaining those side hustles if you want to make it become something one day. So by the time I got laid off, pretty much all of those things that I've been working on are okay, well, all your baby birds that you've been feeding throughout this time can now fly out of the nest, and you're never really going to be ready, I would say, for the day that you decide to take on a fully independent art career. I don't think anyone is ever ready for that next chapter they keep telling themselves in their head. At some point, you just kind of have to do it, even with uncertainty as a part of the equation. And that's what happened to me. By the time I did not have a job starting last year, I was in a place where I was feeling a little bit unstable with my social media platforms. I haven't been growing the same way that I did back in 2019 or so. I was kind of plateauing, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to make it through with these numbers that I'm working with in terms of views and engagement compared to my past. So I had to eventually let that go and just think about how maybe it's not about the numbers. Maybe it's about the ability to keep showing up even when you don't have the numbers. Even when I did that, opportunities would still show up. Like, for example, one of the new additions to my career these days are doing workshops abroad or doing these traveling experiences along with people who are interested in seeking mentorship and art career journeys. It's a path that I didn't even realize would exist until late last year, early this year. So basically, getting laid off, while there was a bit of financial struggle in the beginning, you have to just trust that if there is something you're going to keep up with doing, that you are somewhat passionate in and you can see some sort of response from your community or like other brands reaching out to you, I think you should just keep going in that direction if that's where your calling is, because sometimes you need what you thought was your calling to be removed from you to see what else is calling for you and see what happens when you follow that. And that's kind of what I've been doing, is because even though I've always been working full-time in the animation industry for the past 4 years or so, I've always had this social media calling where it's just like, you know, these sponsorships or collaborators still want to do something with me. And even in the absence of my full-time animation job, there's still activity and energy happening in my side hustle world that I'm like, okay, well, I really don't have anything to do in my animation space, so I'm just gonna follow that indie artist freelance space and see what happens. I also think during this time of being laid off, I feel like you just start to realize what is actually important to you and maybe how having a full-time job isn't the most important thing, because when you don't have a full-time job, you start to notice all the other things that are impacted in your life, maybe due to finances or the lack of a structure, and you start to realize how much you really depended on this full-time job for these things. Maybe if you relied on a full-time job to help you with creating structure in your life, that is good, but there might be a day where you still have to depend on yourself to figure out what does structure mean to you. How can you start creating that structure for yourself so that you can persevere through anything else in life? And things like finances is a little bit more tricky, and I know not everyone can just be like online and being an influencer or whatever, but there are still ways that people can learn how to make money on their own without a full-time job always being the backbone of that. But the basic summary of this is that there's most likely a way for you to make a living by yourself as an artist out there. It's just we haven't been provided with those resources, and the best way to find them now is by finding the people who are doing the things you want to do. Other things which are a little bit more on the personal end that kind of taught me that having a full-time job is not everything is that I've been going through some personal life stuff where, you know, honestly, a pretty life or death situation recently involving one of my very close loved ones that I won't go into too much detail of. As dark as it sounds, sometimes you don't really realize what actually matters to you until you are on the verge of losing somebody who is very close to you, and your whole world just changes when you realize that maybe art and jobs are not everything. And in a way, letting that go and just treating my art and my career as kind of like a secondary thing kind of made me a better artist, because that detachment allows me to approach my art in a way where I'm like, I don't really care what I post anymore, in terms of like, I'm not gonna let this affect my self-esteem. I'm not gonna let this affect my worth, because at the end of the day, I'm creating this art so that I can be able to live a peaceful life with my loved ones. And I think having something more important than your art and career makes you a better artist, because you are not overthinking all of the decisions you make when you create your art. Then moving on to the last thing about why getting laid off was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, was because I realized that so much of my perspective on art and life and whatnot was very dictated by how an industry was working. And sometimes that's not really what you need. I get to decide how I want to view the world again, because I think when you work a full-time industry job, so much of how you view the world is very influenced by the place you work at, because when you work, you literally spend 8 hours of every day surrounded by people who are working professionals in your world, and you're just so focused on work, or how other people have navigated their careers, which for the most part, if you're working a regular 9-to-5 job, it usually is a very traditional trajectory. And even though art and animation, I think when you say that you pursue that as a career, it sounds very like different, unique, and it does sound kind of like alternative. But at the same time, once you start working in that industry, there's a lot of overlap in how the overall structure of working in a place like that is still kind of just like any other 9-to-5 job. Okay, sorry, my camera actually just died, so now I'm resorting to my phone and just gonna have to raw dog the rest of this outro for the video. But going back to how the industry kind of just influenced, you know, my worldviews and approach, like as simple as just even art style or the way that I approached how to make art. So much of what I created was very influenced by, you know, the storyboard artist perspective and how people like creating art in that space. And while that is great, there is still so much bigger of a world of art out there that is just not defined by the rules of being a storyboard artist. I think when you first start off in any first job, a lot of what you do there is going to influence how you approach the rest of your work and even the rest of your life. Just like how as a storyboard artist, you think your trajectory is I'm gonna storyboard, then I'm gonna direct, and maybe I'll like work on a feature film and direct for that and like win an Oscar. But then you even think about how maybe that is not really the end goal that you want, especially once you learn about how the world works. Not everything is fair in life. Not everything is just going to work out the way you want it to. Like there's only so many films that can get nominated for an award at the end of the day, and even with that, I am sure that there's always behind the scenes things that you don't know about why certain things get certain recognition and why other things don't. And sometimes you just realize that you don't want to participate in that type of system or world, and you have to carve out your own path. And the best thing you could do for yourself is know what actually works for you. But I think the biggest struggle in life is learning how to circle back to you and yourself and what you want after being presented with all of these other influential things that tell you this is what you should be. Your challenge is to find out what do you want to be. And I think that's kind of what I've been learning to figure out again, because during this time there was a lot of resistance when I first got laid off. I knew it was coming, but I was still kind of in the mindset of like, I need to find the next job. I need to know what next opportunity is available. Eventually I realized like I really have so much stuff going on outside of my animation world that is still giving me energy and activity and showing me signs that I should participate in this world. So I was like, why not just follow that and see what happens? And through that, I kind of learned that maybe there are other things I want, like being able to travel often, even outside of these Japan and South Korea art career journeys. I would still travel on my own without that being a part of the picture. For those of you who know me, I love international travel. I would have traveled even if it was not my job. But the fact that now it could be a part of my job sparks a new idea in me that there are other possibilities out there beyond just the animation one. For example, I always thought that working in animation, I would just eventually be sent on a research trip and learn about something that I could incorporate back in my work. And I think this idealized version of how we think the industry works doesn't always come out to play, but you have to create what that idealized version of yourself was for yourself in your own life without that industry reciprocating the same thing you wanted back. So ultimately, I think that the greatest challenge in this time is learning how to be yourself, to do your own thing, even when we are in a world that makes it seem like it's very hard to do that. And a lot of people tend to comment on my videos and say things like, okay, but like you have a following already and like you're already doing this, like this doesn't count for other artists. But I'm like, but there was a time that I was literally just like you guys. It's not like I just like poofed overnight, like have 200k subs on YouTube out of nowhere. I had no job. I was just dealing with my insecurities, on the verge of being sent back to like New York. There were a lot of struggles that I've went through where if you look through my old videos, I talk about that stuff. But you know, this is the chapter of life I'm sharing now, where after I've built up those things over the course of years, maybe this chapter of what I'm sharing about my life might not be applicable to you right now, but maybe come back to this video in 5 years or so and maybe you'll understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, I hope that this video provided some sort of comfort, especially during this time of uncertainty and instability, and that maybe just me sharing my thoughts here will kind of help someone else. So yeah, just know that you're not alone and that at the end of the day, our realities are really just based off of how we decide we want to think and approach our lives. So if there's something that's not working with you right now with the way life has been traditionally done, maybe it's time to start looking outside of that. Anyway, thanks for watching this video and I'll see you all in the next one.